27 years. Think about that number for a moment. 27 years. That is how long one man spent in a prison cell, for a crime that was not really a crime, for refusing to accept that some people are born better than others, for believing that all human beings, black, white, brown, deserve to live with the same dignity. 27 years, most of them in a tiny stone cell, sleeping on a thin mat on the floor, eating cold food, breaking rocks in a quarry under the burning African sun until his eyes were permanently damaged by the glare. Most people would not survive 1 year of this. Most people would come out of such a prison broken, angry, bitter, filled with a hatred that could never be washed away. But this man, this one extraordinary man, walked out of that prison after 27 years, and the first thing he did was forgive the people who put him there. He did not call for revenge. He did not ask for war. He held out his hand to the very people who had taken away half of his life. And because of that single, almost impossible act of forgiveness, an entire nation was saved from a bloody civil war. Millions of lives, black and white, that would have been lost were quietly spared. A new country was born, in peace, on the ashes of the old. That man's name was Nelson Mandela, and tonight I am going to tell you his story. Not just because it is one of the greatest stories of the 20th century, though it is, but because, if you are learning English right now, if life feels unfair to you, if you feel small, if you feel like the world has put you in your own kind of prison, then this story is for you. Because Mandela teaches us something almost no one else can teach. He teaches us that nothing in the world is more powerful than a human being who refuses to give up. Stay with me all the way to the end, because by the time this video ends, two things will be stronger inside you: your English and your belief in what one quiet, patient, determined human heart can do. Let us begin. Before I start, I want to ask you for one small thing. If this story moves you tonight, if it teaches you anything about courage, or forgiveness, or hope, please tap the red subscribe button. Just one tap. It is the smallest thing in the world. But for me, it means everything. Because I make these videos for people like you. People who want to grow. People who refuse to give up. People who believe their lives can become something beautiful. If you subscribe, the next story will find you exactly when you need it most. And if you can, tap the like button too. It tells me to keep going. It tells me to keep finding these stories for you. That is all I ask. Now let me take you back to South Africa, to the year 1918, to a small village in the rolling green hills of the Eastern Cape, where a baby boy is about to be born. It was July 1918. In a tiny village called Mvezo, a quiet place of grass and mud huts, far from any city, far from any road that mattered, a baby boy was born into a small wooden hut. His mother named him Rolilala. It is a name from the Xhosa language. Most people translate it as pulling the branch of a tree. But there is another, more interesting meaning that the village people whispered when they heard it. It can also mean troublemaker. His parents did not know it yet. But that name given to a tiny baby in a quiet African village would turn out to be the most perfect name ever given to any child in history. Because this baby would grow up to make trouble. The right kind of trouble. The kind of trouble that changes the world. He came from the Thembu royal family, a respected tribe with a long, proud history. His father, Henry, was a chief and a wise advisor to the king of the Thembu people. But the family was not rich. They lived simply, in a hut made of mud and grass, with no electricity, no running water, no modern comforts of any kind. Mandela's earliest memories were of the open fields, the rolling hills, the clear blue African sky. He ran barefoot through tall grass with the other village boys. He herded cattle. He swam in the small streams. He played simple games with sticks and stones. At night, he sat with the elders around a fire, and he listened. The elders told old stories. Stories of brave warriors. Stories of wise kings. Stories of African heroes who had fought, long ago, for the freedom and honor of their people. Little Rolihlahla, the small boy who would one day become Nelson Mandela, sat quietly in the firelight, with his eyes wide, drinking in every word. These stories planted something in his small heart, a seed of leadership, of courage, of belief that one person, even one small person, could stand against the wrong and change the world. His father said something to him one day that he never forgot. His father said, "A real leader is not someone who wants power for himself. A real leader is someone who serves his people. A real leader serves." That single sentence, spoken by an African chief to his small son in a mud hut in a forgotten village, became the rule of Mandela's whole life. He served his people, from his first day to his last. Let me stop here just for a moment, because there is something important in what I have just told you. Nelson Mandela was not born in a palace. He was not born in a great city. He was not born to wealth or fame or special advantage of any kind. He was born in a mud hut, in a forgotten village, in a country that the rest of the world barely knew existed. And yet, he changed history. Remember this, my friend. Where you start in life does not decide where you finish. If a small boy in a mud hut, in a tiny African village, can grow up to change his country, free his people, and inspire the whole world, then the place you were born, the family you come from, the small life you may be living right now, none of it is the limit of what you can become. The limit is only in your mind. Now let us continue. When Rolihlahla was just 9 years old, tragedy struck. His father became sick. There were no hospitals in the village, no doctors. The illness moved through him, and there was nothing anyone could do. Within days, his father was gone. The small boy, who had loved his father so deeply, who had learned about leadership from him, was left without him. It was a devastating loss. But, in a strange way that life sometimes works, his father's death also opened a new door. After her husband's death, Mandela's mother could not raise him alone. So she made a decision. She took her son to live with a powerful relative, a man named Chief Intaba, the leader of the Thembu people. Chief Intaba welcomed Mandela into his home. He treated the boy almost as his own son. And suddenly, for the first time in his life, Mandela was inside a new world. He was living in the chief's residence. He watched the chief hold great meetings. He saw how leaders gathered. He heard discussions about justice and responsibility and the welfare of the people. He was being educated not in any school, but in the everyday classroom of real leadership. This is something fascinating, my friend. Sometimes the worst thing that ever happens to us turns out to be the door to the most important thing we will ever do. If Mandela's father had not died, the boy would have stayed in his tiny village. He would have grown up as a small farmer. He would never have lived in the chief's house. He would never have learned what real leadership looked like. The pain, terrible as it was, became the path. If you are going through something hard right now, hold on to this thought. You cannot yet see how today's pain might shape tomorrow's gift, but it often does. Stay with the road. Keep walking. At the age of 7, Mandela had started school. It was a simple country school run by Methodist missionaries. And on his very first day, something strange happened. His teacher, an English-speaking woman named Miss Mandingan, looked at the small boy and said, "I will call you Nelson." That was it. In those days, in colonial South Africa, it was the custom for African children to be given an English name at school. The teachers found it easier. The African names with their own deep meanings, were simply replaced. Little Rolihlahla did not understand why he needed another name. He did not understand why his real name was not good enough, but he accepted it. And from that day, the world knew him as Nelson. Even now, when we say the name Nelson Mandela, we are saying a name that was given to him by a colonial teacher who did not bother to learn his real one. There is something quietly powerful in that. The boy who would one day fight for African dignity, who would spend his entire life insisting that Africans were the equal of any human being on earth, began his school years by having even his name taken away. He would spend the rest of his life giving names and dignity and freedom back to his people. Mandela quickly became a serious student. He loved books. He loved learning. He was curious about everything. His favorite subjects were English literature, geography, and history, especially the history of African heroes who had fought against the early colonial powers. He read by candlelight. He memorized poems. He asked questions that his teachers often could not answer. And he made a promise to himself, even as a boy, he would never stop learning. Years later, as a famous man, he said something that has been quoted in every school in the world. He said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." Education is a weapon. Think about that, my friend. Not money, not fame, not the right family. Education. The very fact that you are watching this video, practicing your English, growing your mind, learning new ideas, means you are already building Mandela's weapon for yourself. Every word you understand, every sentence you absorb, every video you finish all the way through, it is all sharpening your weapon. Keep going. As Mandela grew older, he began to see clearly and painfully the world he was actually living in. South Africa, in those years, was a deeply divided country. The white minority held all the power. They owned the businesses. They ran the government. They lived in beautiful homes in beautiful neighborhoods. The black majority, the actual people of the land, the descendants of those who had lived there for thousands of years, had almost nothing. Black people could not vote. Black people could not own land in most areas. Black people could not live in white neighborhoods, could not enter many shops, could not use the same buses, the same parks, the same drinking fountains. This system was called apartheid. Apartheid is an Afrikaans word that means simply separation, but the separation was not equal. It was designed, from start to finish, to keep one race up and the other race down. Black people, in their own country, were treated like strangers, like second-class citizens in the land their ancestors had lived in long before any white settler ever arrived. Young Mandela could see this injustice everywhere he looked. In the way black workers were spoken to, in the way black children were sent to inferior schools, in the way black families were forced into poor townships, far from the cities, with no real opportunities. He saw it, and something inside him began to burn. At the age of 16, Mandela went through a traditional Xhosa ceremony, the ceremony in which a boy becomes a man. During the ceremony, the elders gave their blessings. But one elder spoke with great sadness. He said, "We give you these blessings. But what is the use of all of this when we are still slaves in our own country?" Those words hit Mandela like a hammer. We are still slaves in our own country. In that moment, the young man knew his life would not be ordinary. He could not stay quiet about what he was seeing. Something would have to change. And he somehow, in some way, would have to be part of changing it. When Mandela was 19, the chief who had raised him made a decision. He arranged a marriage for the young man. In those days, in those communities, this was completely normal. Marriages were arranged by elders. The young people did not always choose for themselves. But Mandela had other dreams. He did not want to marry yet. He wanted to continue his education. He wanted to discover the world beyond the village. He wanted to make his own choices about his own life. So he did something bold, almost shocking for a young man in his position. He ran away. He left the chief's home in the middle of the night. He took only what he could carry, and he set out for the city of Johannesburg, the great mining city, the heart of South Africa, the place where everything was happening. He had very little money. He knew almost no one. He had no plan, but he had a hunger, and he had a dream. And he was already a kind of troublemaker, exactly as his name had foretold. Johannesburg in those days was a city of two worlds. On one side, beautiful neighborhoods, tall buildings, restaurants, theaters, white South Africans living comfortable, modern lives. On the other side, the townships, crowded, poor, dusty streets full of small shacks made of metal sheets and wood. Black families packed together, trying to survive on tiny wages, sending their men into dangerous mines and dirty factories every morning. Mandela arrived in the city with almost nothing. He rented a tiny room in one of the poorest townships. He worked, at first, as a night watchman at a gold mine, sitting awake in the cold, dark hours, guarding the entrance to a mine that paid black workers a fraction of what it paid white workers for the same dangerous job. He was often hungry, often tired, often cold, but he kept going. He found a position as a clerk in a law firm, a low-level job, but one that opened a window into the world of the law. He saw how legal systems worked. He saw how, in apartheid South Africa, the law was not designed to bring justice, it was designed to keep black people powerless. And he made a decision. He would not just witness this injustice, he would learn the law itself. He would master it. And he would use it as a weapon to fight back. He enrolled at the University of the Witwatersrand, one of the very few universities in South Africa that admitted black students. He was almost the only black face in his classes. He faced discrimination every single day. Some white students refused to sit next to him. Some professors spoke to him with quiet contempt. But he did not break. He studied late into the night, by candlelight in his small township room. He went to class. He kept his head up. He earned his degree. And during these years, he found something else, something even more important than his law degree. He found his cause. He joined the African National Congress, the ANC, a political organization that had been fighting peacefully for the rights of black South Africans for decades. At ANC meetings, Mandela heard passionate speeches. He met activists. He met thinkers. He met other young men and women who burned with the same fire he did. He found his community. He found his purpose. He found what he had been searching for all those years. I want to pause again, my friend, because there is something important here. Mandela did not change the world alone. This is something we forget when we tell stories of great men. We make them sound like one heroic individual who did everything by themselves. But the truth is, great change always happens in community. Mandela became Mandela because he found other people who believed what he believed, who were willing to fight beside him, who held him up when he was tired, who challenged him when he was wrong. So if you are working on something hard, if you have a dream that feels too big for one person, do not try to do it all alone. Find your community. Find the people who believe what you believe, the people who will fight beside you, the people who will lift you up when you fall. You were never meant to do this alone, my friend. Even the greatest heroes had a community behind them. In the late 1940s, Mandela and a small group of younger activists felt that the ANC needed a fresh approach. The old ANC had been polite, patient, asking the white government again and again to be reasonable, to grant black people more rights. The white government had said no every time. Mandela and his friends formed the ANC Youth League, a more energetic, more urgent group within the ANC. Their message was clear. Politeness was not enough. They needed action. Mandela began giving speeches. He was tall. He was handsome. He had a deep, calm, powerful voice. When he spoke, people listened. He talked about justice, about dignity, about the right of every African to be treated as a full human being in their own country. People started to whisper his name. Have you heard the young lawyer? Have you heard Mandela speak? He was becoming a leader. And one of his most famous sayings, one he repeated often in those early years, was, "It always seems impossible until it is done. It always seems impossible until it is done." Remember that, my friend. Whatever you are facing, it always seems impossible until it is done. During these years, Mandela met a young woman named Evelyn. She was a nurse. She was beautiful, intelligent, and kind. She shared Mandela's dream of a better South Africa. They married in 1944. They started a family. Mandela became a husband and a father, but his life was already being pulled in two directions. On one side, his family, his wife, his small children, his dream of a normal, happy home life. On the other side, the struggle, the cause, the political fight that consumed more of his time, his energy, his heart with every passing year. He tried to balance both, but the truth is, when you give yourself completely to a great cause, your family pays a price. His marriage to Evelyn slowly began to crack. He was rarely home. When he was home, his mind was elsewhere. Activist meetings ran late into the night. Police would arrive at the door, demanding to know where he had been. Eventually, the marriage ended. Years later, Mandela met another woman, a fearless young social worker named Winnie. She, too, shared his fire. She, too, would pay a terrible price for loving him. But that part of the story comes later. For now, just remember this. Great causes ask great sacrifices. The men and women who change the world almost always pay for it, with the parts of their personal life that they love most. That is one of the hardest truths of being a person who fights for something bigger than themselves. In 1948, the South African government did something that horrified the world. A new political party came into power, and they passed even harsher apartheid laws. These new laws dictated where black people could live, where they could work, where they could go to school, which buses they could ride, which hospitals they could enter. Even whom they could fall in love with. Interracial marriage was now a crime. Every part of life was now controlled by the color of your skin. Mandela and his ANC colleagues knew they had to act. They organized peaceful protests, strikes, marches. Mandela was deeply inspired, in those years, by the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, the great leader who had freed India from British rule decades earlier through non-violent resistance. Mandela believed, at first, that peaceful protest could win. Thousands of black South Africans and brave white allies joined the marches. They risked their jobs, their homes, sometimes even their lives. The government's response was brutal. Protesters were beaten by police, arrested without trial. Some were killed. Mandela himself was arrested again and again and again. The government tried, over and over, to silence him, but he refused to be silenced. He once said something that I want you to remember. He said, "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the triumph over it." The brave man is not the one who does not feel afraid, but the one who conquers that fear. The brave man is not the one who has no fear. The brave man is the one who feels the fear and walks forward anyway. If you are afraid of something right now, your future, your dreams, a hard conversation, a big risk, you are not weak. You are human. The question is not whether you feel fear. The question is whether you let it stop you. In 1952, Mandela achieved one of the dreams he had carried since he was a young law student. He and his close friend, Oliver Tambo, opened their own law firm, the very first black-owned law firm in South Africa. It was called Mandela and Tambo. The firm did something extraordinary. It provided free or very low-cost legal help to the thousands of black South Africans who had been beaten, arrested, or unfairly treated under apartheid, black workers who had been cheated by their employers, black families who had been thrown out of their homes, black men and women who had been arrested simply for being in the wrong neighborhood. Mandela and Tambo defended them all, day after day, year after year. Their small office in downtown Johannesburg was always crowded. Lines of desperate people stretched out the door and down the street. Mandela worked himself to exhaustion, days in the courtroom, defending the powerless. Nights in secret ANC meetings, planning the next steps in the struggle. His phone was tapped, his office was watched, his friends were being arrested, some were beaten, some disappeared. And still, he refused to stop. In 1960, something happened that changed everything. A peaceful protest had been organized in a small town called Sharpeville. Thousands of black men, women, and children gathered to protest the apartheid laws without weapons, without violence, without threat. The police arrived, and without warning, they opened fire. They shot into the crowd. 69 people were killed. Hundreds were wounded, many shot in the back as they tried to run away. The world was horrified. For Mandela and the ANC, it was a terrible turning point. For years, they had believed in peaceful protest. They had believed that, eventually, the white government would see reason, would listen, would change. But Sharpeville made it clear the apartheid government would never listen to peaceful voices. They would only respond to force. So Mandela and a small group of leaders made a painful, controversial decision. They formed a secret armed group called Umkhonto we Sizwe, which means Spear of the Nation. Their goal was not to harm innocent people. Mandela was clear about that. Their goal was to sabotage government buildings, electrical stations, and apartheid structures to disrupt the system, to force the government to negotiate. It was a terrible decision. Mandela himself struggled with it. He had loved Gandhi's path of non-violence. But after Sharpeville, he believed peaceful protest alone would not save his people. He went underground. He became a wanted man. For months, he moved across South Africa in disguise, organizing the resistance. He traveled to other African countries to gain international support. He met with leaders, gave interviews, built alliances. The newspapers called him the Black Pimpernel because he was so good at avoiding capture, like the famous fictional character. But he could not hide forever. In August of 1962, after months on the run, Nelson Mandela was finally caught. He was arrested. He was charged with sabotage, treason, and trying to overthrow the government. If he were found guilty, the punishment was death. His trial became one of the most famous trials of the 20th century. And in that courtroom, Mandela did something extraordinary. He did not try to escape responsibility. He did not deny his actions. He used the trial itself as his stage, as his speech to the world. He stood before the judge, and he spoke. For 4 long hours, he spoke. He explained why he had fought, what apartheid had done to his people, what kind of country he dreamed of, and he ended his speech with words that have echoed through history. He said, "I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if it needs to be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." He was prepared to die. He said it openly, to the judge, to the prosecutors, to the world. He was not afraid of death if death was the price of his dream. The court did not sentence him to death. They sentenced him to something almost worse: life in prison. Mandela was 46 years old. He would spend the next 27 years of his life behind bars. The prison was on Robben Island. It was a small, windswept island in the cold sea off the coast of Cape Town. The waves crashed against the rocks. The wind never stopped blowing. The wild seabirds cried overhead. It was a place designed to break the human spirit. Mandela was put into a tiny stone cell, less than 7 feet wide, 8 feet long, no bed. He slept on a thin straw mat on the cold stone floor. A small, high window let in a little light during the day. A single bucket served as a toilet. That was his world. For year after year after year, each day was the same. The prisoners were woken before dawn. They were marched to a limestone quarry, a great white pit dug into the earth. There, they were ordered to break rocks all day under the blazing African sun. The white limestone reflected the sunlight so violently that it slowly damaged Mandela's eyes, a damage that he would carry for the rest of his life. His hands grew rough, his back grew sore, his skin grew dark and weathered. For 1 hour each day, The prisoners had to be in their cells in silence. The food was bad. The cold was bitter in winter. The summer heat was unbearable. The guards were often cruel. Mandela was allowed only one visitor every 6 months. One letter every 6 months. Imagine that. His wife, Winnie, his children, his mother, his friends. Most of them he could not see, could not write to, could not even know if they were still alive for months at a time. The prison was designed to slowly erase him, to make him forgotten, to make him irrelevant, to make him bend and beg and apologize and disappear. But Robben Island made one terrible mistake. It thought it had imprisoned a man. It had not. It had imprisoned a force. Inside that tiny cell, Mandela did something that almost no one expected. He grew. He used the long, empty years to read, to study, to think, to plan. He read books on history, politics, philosophy. He studied poetry. He memorized long passages of great writers to keep his mind alive. He even did something incredible. He taught himself the Afrikaans language, the language of his oppressors, the language his prison guards spoke. Why? Because he believed even then, in his cell, even with no end in sight, that one day he would have to sit across a table from these same white leaders. And he would have to talk to them, and to truly understand someone, you must speak their language. He was preparing for a future no one else believed in. He also taught the younger prisoners. They called the prison secretly Mandela University. Older political prisoners would teach the younger ones history, politics, English, mathematics. The prison itself became a school for the next generation of African leaders. And Mandela, even from a cold cell, became their teacher. He once said something that captures who he was. In those long prison years, I am fundamentally an optimist. Whether that comes from nature or from nurture, I cannot say. Part of being optimistic is keeping one's head pointed toward the sun, one's feet moving forward. Keep your head toward the sun. Keep your feet moving forward. That was his secret. Even in a prison cell, even with no end in sight, he never stopped pointing his face toward the sun. He never stopped moving forward, 1 inch at a time, in his own mind. Outside the prison walls, something amazing was happening. The longer Mandela was imprisoned, the more famous he became. You would think it would be the opposite. You would think that locking him away would silence him. But the world began to whisper his name, then to speak it, then to shout it. Free Nelson Mandela. Across continents, across Africa, Europe, America, Asia, protests began to grow. People who had never met him carried his picture through the streets. Students chanted his name on university campuses. Musicians wrote songs about him. Countries began to refuse to trade with South Africa economic sanctions designed to pressure the apartheid government. Bob Marley sang for him. Stevie Wonder won a Grammy and dedicated it to him. Athletes refused to compete in South Africa. The apartheid government had thrown Mandela into a cell, hoping to make him forgotten. Instead, they made him a symbol that the whole world could see. A symbol of one man's quiet, unbreakable resistance to injustice. Inside his prison, Mandela could not see all of this, not at first. He had no television, no newspapers, no internet, of course. But slowly, the news reached him. He began to understand. The world was awakening, and his patience, his quiet, unbreakable patience, year after year, decade after decade, was changing history. By the late 1980s, the apartheid government was in crisis. The economic sanctions were destroying their economy. The international pressure was unbearable. Inside the country, protests were growing louder year by year. The system could not hold much longer. In secret, the white government began to do something that, 20 years earlier, would have been unthinkable. They began to talk to Mandela, quietly, in the prison. Without telling the public, government officials would visit his cell. They wanted to know, could there be a peaceful end to apartheid? Or would the country fall into a bloody civil war? Mandela talked with them. Carefully, patiently, with dignity. He never raised his voice. He never threatened. He simply spoke calmly, clearly, intelligently about what kind of country South Africa could become if it had the courage to choose peace. He was, by now, in his 70s, an old man, with damaged eyes, with aching joints, with 27 years of his life lost behind prison walls. But his mind was sharper than ever, and he understood something that almost no one else understood. For South Africa to be free, really free, black South Africans would have to win their rights. But white South Africans would also have to be welcomed into the new country. There could be no revenge, no reverse oppression, no cycle of new violence to replace the old. If South Africa was to be saved, the whole country, black and white, had to be saved together. This was the impossible idea Mandela carried in his heart, and he was about to ask his entire country to believe in it. On the 11th of February 1990, the world watched as Nelson Mandela walked out of prison. He was 71 years old. His hair had turned grey. His face was deeply lined, but he held himself tall, proud, calm. Cameras from every country in the world recorded the moment. Crowds lined the streets, many people crying, many cheering, many simply staring in disbelief. It had been 27 years. His first public words were not words of anger. They were not words of revenge. He said, "I stand here before you not as a prophet but as a humble servant of you, the people. Today, the time for healing of wounds has come. The time to build is upon us. The time for healing, the time to build. Not the time for revenge, not the time for war. The time to build a new country, together." The streets of South Africa erupted in celebration. People danced, people wept, strangers hugged. The whole continent of Africa rejoiced. Mandela was free. But his greatest work was only just beginning. Now Mandela faced the hardest task of his life. He had to convince the millions of black South Africans who had suffered for generations under apartheid to forgive. And he had to convince the white South Africans who had held all the power to give it up peacefully. It was, perhaps, the most difficult act of leadership in modern history. Most people, in his position, would have called for revenge. Many of his own followers wanted exactly that. After decades of suffering, of murder, of stolen land and broken families, they wanted the white government to pay. But Mandela said no. He said something that has been quoted across the world ever since. He said, "Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies. Resentment is poison. You drink it, and you think you are hurting the other person, but you are only poisoning yourself." Mandela refused to drink the poison. He met with the very people who had imprisoned him, the leaders of the apartheid government. He sat across the table from them. He shook their hands. He worked with them patiently, carefully to build a new country, together. He insisted on truth, but he forgave. He insisted on justice, but he refused revenge. He held out his hand to his former enemies, and, miracle of miracles, his enemies took it. In 1994, history was made. For the first time in South Africa's existence, every single citizen, regardless of race, was allowed to vote. The lines at polling stations stretched for kilometers. Black men and women, many of them in their 70s and 80s, stood for hours under the African sun, voting. For the very first time, in the country where their ancestors had been born, many wept as they cast their ballots. When the votes were counted, the world heard the announcement that everyone had been waiting for. Nelson Mandela had been elected the first black president of South Africa. The man who had spent 27 years in a prison cell was now the leader of the country that had imprisoned him. His inauguration was attended by leaders from around the world. In his speech, he said, "Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another. Never again." A new country had been born. As president, Mandela did something extraordinary. He used his power not for revenge, but for unity. One of his most famous acts came in 1995 during the Rugby World Cup. Rugby, in South Africa, had been a white man's sport. Black South Africans had no love for the national rugby team, the Springboks. To them, the team was a symbol of the old apartheid era. Many black leaders wanted to abolish the Springboks, to change the name, to erase that history. But Mandela said no. He believed something different. He believed that the Springboks could become a symbol of the new South Africa, a sport that all races could rally behind. So, during the World Cup, Mandela walked onto the field wearing the green Springbok jersey, the same jersey that had once stood for white power, and he shook hands with the captain, a white South African. The stadium full of mostly white fans held its breath, and then erupted. Tens of thousands of white South Africans began to chant, "Nelson, Nelson." Nelson? The Springboks won the World Cup that year. And in that moment when a black president, in a Springbok jersey, lifted the trophy with a white captain, the impossible became real. A divided country had found, somehow, the beginning of a soul. That story became so legendary, it was later made into a famous Hollywood movie called Invictus. The title came from a poem that Mandela had loved during his prison years. The poem ends with these unforgettable lines: "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. The master of my fate. The captain of my soul." Even in a prison cell, even when the world had taken everything else, that one thing Mandela had kept: the mastery of his own soul. Mandela served one term as president. When his 5 years were over, he did something rare and noble, something that most leaders, given that kind of power, cannot bring themselves to do. He stepped down. He gave up the presidency. He returned to private life to spend his final years working for the causes he loved: fighting poverty, supporting education, raising awareness about HIV and AIDS, which was devastating South Africa. He traveled the world. He met young leaders. He inspired new generations. Wherever he went, crowds came simply to be in the same room with him, to feel the quiet, powerful presence of a man who had, somehow, lived through hell and come out with his heart still full of love. On the 5th of December, 2013, Nelson Mandela passed away peacefully at his home in Johannesburg. He was 95 years old. The world stopped to mourn. His funeral was attended by more world leaders than any funeral in history: presidents and kings, movie stars and musicians, ordinary South Africans who had walked for days just to be near the great man one last time. The boy from the mud hut in Mvezo, the young troublemaker who had run away to Johannesburg, the prisoner of Robben Island, the president of a free South Africa, the man who had taught the world that forgiveness is stronger than hate. He was gone. But what he had built and what he had taught would live on, forever. So, what can we learn from the life of Nelson Mandela? Let me share 3 lessons, 3 gifts that his life gives to you tonight. The first lesson is this: never give up, ever. Mandela spent 27 years in a cell. 27 years. There were moments when he must have wondered if he would ever walk free. Moments when the cause seemed lost. Moments when it would have been so easy to give up, apologize, sign whatever they wanted, and go home. He did not. He held on to his dream through 27 long, bitter years because he believed that one day it would come true. And it did. Whatever long road you are walking right now, my friend, keep walking. 27 years is a long time. But Mandela's freedom proves something amazing. Almost any dream, if you do not give up on it, will eventually come true. The second lesson is this: forgiveness is the greatest power. Mandela could have come out of prison breathing fire. He could have led his country into civil war. He could have done to white South Africans what white South Africans had done to his people. He chose, instead, to forgive, not because the wrongs done to him were small. They were enormous, unspeakable, but because he understood clearly, deeply, that hate would have destroyed his country and destroyed him along with it. Forgiveness is not weakness, my friend. Forgiveness is the strongest, most powerful, most difficult act a human being can perform. If someone has hurt you, and you carry that pain in your heart, Mandela's life teaches you something important. You can put that pain down, not for them, for you, for your own peace, for your own future. The third lesson is this: your life can change everything. Nelson Mandela was, at first, just one person, one man in a mud hut, one law student in a township, one activist among many. But he refused to be small. He refused to be silent. He refused to believe that one person could not change the world. And, in the end, he changed history. You may feel small right now. You may feel that your voice does not matter, that your dreams are too big for someone like you, that nothing you do could possibly matter. But you are wrong, my friend. You can change everything, not all at once, not tomorrow, but over the long, patient years of a determined life. Yes, you can. Mandela proved it. So can you, my friend. I want to speak to you directly before this video ends. Because Mandela's story is not really about a man who lived long ago in a country far from yours. It is about you. It is about the cell that you may be sitting in right now. The cell may not be made of stone, but it may be made of fear, of self-doubt, of the cruel words someone told you long ago that you still believe, of the past that you cannot seem to forgive. That cell is just as real as Robben Island. And the way out is the same way Mandela walked. One day at a time, one small choice at a time. Keeping your face toward the sun. Keeping your feet moving forward. You can do this, my friend. You have everything you need inside you. The world has put a stone in your hand. But it is up to you to decide whether to throw that stone in anger or to use it to build something beautiful. Mandela used his stone to build a country. What will you build with yours? If this video moved you tonight, even a little, please do these small things for me. Tap the like button so I know this story reached your heart. Leave a comment below and tell me, what cell are you walking out of this year? What chain have you decided to break? Let your dream live by saying it out loud here. And subscribe to this channel and turn on the bell, because we are on a journey together. A journey of telling true stories that wake up the soul. A journey of learning English by listening to lives that mattered. A journey of becoming, finally, the people we were always meant to be. I make these videos for you, for the dreamers, for the patient ones, for the people who refuse to be defined by their cell, whatever shape that cell may take. If you want more stories like this one, true stories that teach you English and feed your soul at the same time, then this is your home. Subscribe and stay with me. I will leave you with the words Nelson Mandela himself spoke. Words I want you to carry with you tonight and every night for the rest of your life. He said, "The greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall." Read that again in your heart. The greatest glory, not in never falling, but in rising every single time. You will fall in life many times. So did Mandela. The question, the only question, is whether you will rise again, and again, and again. If you can do that, if you can rise, no matter how many times life knocks you down, then somewhere, somehow, Mandela is smiling at you from the great open sky over Africa. Now go and rise. The world is waiting for the person you are about to become. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I will see you in the next video. Until then, stay hopeful, stay strong, and keep moving forward.